sorry. So this is where you can go to see all the broadcasts that I've done up to this point, except for one. And that was the previous one that I did on homeopathy, where there was a problem with the audio where it had a double slap back kind of echo to my voice, which made it very difficult to understand what I was saying. And so I'm rebroadcasting the information on homeopathy, but I'm going a step deeper related to what we had talked about last week, which really was covering the ideas around fractals and holograms and the ever-repeating patterns that we see in nature, where everything is reflected in everything else in miniature, in forever repeating patterns. And that ties in with some of the ideas of this weird thing in quantum physics called spooky action at a distance, which phrase that Einstein came up with to describe something he didn't like very well about quantum physics, this spooky action at a distance thing he didn't like too much, because there didn't seem to be any kind of scientific explanation for it. But the idea that if we have fractal patterns and we have a master pattern made of smaller patterns, and all the smaller patterns are reflective of the master pattern, boundless inland forever, that as you zoom into these smaller patterns, you see that they look exactly like the master pattern that they're part of. And everything is intimately connected to everything else, similar to what we see in the law of octaves and harmonics in music, in acoustics, the physics of acoustics. For instance, if I take a wine glass and I ping the wine glass and I can hear that note and I sing that note, the wine glass will start to vibrate with sympathetic resonance based on the underlying physics principles of the science of coupled oscillators. And this idea of coupled oscillators means that everything in the universe that is tuned within a certain mathematical value of each other causes this sympathetic resonance phenomenon. And that's got to do with octaves and harmonics. And an octave is 1/2 the frequency or double the frequency, and harmonics is what we saw with Pythagoras experimenting with the length of a tuned string, cut exactly in half as an octave: 1/3, 2/3, 4/5, 7/8. Those fractions, measurements, lend themselves to become new notes. And the note is a fractional harmonic of the open string. And that is where music comes from. Music is this mathematical relationship between two notes that has to do with certain fractions, 1/2, 2/3, 3/4, 4/5, 5/6. All of those are harmonies, harmonics, form chords. And our brain considers them to be pleasing because it reiterates a mathematical principle that consciousness itself used to design my body in its relative proportions and the atomic structure and atoms arranged in a periodic table in harmonic sequences. The structure of each atom marches through the periodic table according to the laws of harmonics. The universe at large is based on the same principles. So wherever those principles are reiterated, consciousness finds that to be pleasing, and that's what is reflected in the harmonic mathematics of music and the structure of the universe. And it's that same kind of principle that's involved in a deeper esoteric level of what we see in homeopathy. But the first thing I'm going to explain a bit about, homeopathy itself from a physics standpoint. And when we look at what I was talking about, where the different kind of forms in nature show up over and over and over again in the way that plant spirals, or the spiral of galactic nebula, or the spiral of the hair growth at the crown of your head, or these kind of patterns that we see also in your lungs. Patterns of neurons seem to mimic what's going on in the intergalactic web. Arteries and veins in your body seem to look the same as the ones in leaves and plants, those kind of things. And as we talked about last time, where we're looking at fractals, where the massive fractal pattern of this overall picture here is reflected in miniature in this picture, and this is reflected in miniature in this one, and this one is reflected in miniature in that one right there, and all the little components inside of that one look like this whole forever. So this is kind of an arrangement that we see over and over again in nature and in the construction of our body. This idea of a fractal hologram where they come together, where information is what consciousness is really all about, and the universe is relationships of information formed into kind of a hyper-dimensional movie with quantum pixels density of the image, so you can't see through it, that kind of a thing, that is collectively created moment by moment by a network of consciousness of all living beings that are making a sort of consensus vote of what the next moment is going to be, which manifests from consciousness itself in the quantum field. And there are scientists who speculate that perhaps we are living in some kind of a holographic, fractalized simulation, which I said last week, goes very closely with the ideas in the Vedas, 4,000-year-old text from India in Sanskrit, talked about this very idea that reality itself is got no more reality than a dream in the mind of God. But I call that, a dream with teeth, because, these dreams, you bleed and you are in pain. But back in, in the 1800s, we had this guy, Samuel Hahnemann, who grew up in Germany, this Meissen, Germany. And he was a pretty amazing guy. He was a medical doctor. He had 12 children. He was an expert in languages. He spoke 10 languages and added a few more as time went on. And he had deep reservations about medical practice. And eventually he broke away and from the modern medicine practice at that time, gave up his practice and became a translator of medical texts in different languages. He particularly was at odds with medicine practices at that time, with bloodletting and the use of leeches and things like that. And when he was translating one of these texts, he was translating a piece on something called cinchona bark, which was used for malaria, which the bark is what quinine comes from. So this idea that he was reading about quinine, which is taken from this bark of the cinchona plant, was successfully treating the symptoms of malaria. However, if you take this bark and you make a tea out of it and you drink it and you're normal, it gives you the symptoms of malaria. And this began his brain down a path of treating like with like in a minor dosage. So that became a whole science of exploring what's called proving reactions, where you explore all kinds of different herbs and plants and substances, and you make tinctures out of those, and you have volunteers take these tinctures and see what kind of symptoms show up. And you take copious notes of what symptoms come up, and when those symptoms show up in patients, you use a diluted form of that same substance to treat it. And so he returned to his medical practice and wrote a series of articles and presented them to the medical college on this new idea of homeopathy, which is fighting fire with fire, like with like, in minute dosages. And someplace in there, lost to history, is where he came up with the idea of taking a diluted substance and potentizing it by shaking vigorously shaking, changed it from a dilute substance to a potentized substance. A good example is the foxglove plant, which is used for high blood pressure in a tea. So taking the tea of the foxglove plant helps with lowering your high blood pressure. And when the modern medical system gets involved, they're not interested in herbology, although all pharmaceutical medicine comes from plants. It really is based on herbs. Herbal substances in nature have healing properties which are routinely explored by modern medicine. Pharmaceutical companies constantly trying to derive the active chemical ingredient that's doing the work in these plants, because you can't patent a plant, but you can patent the artificial extraction and laboratory artificial growth of chemical compounds to make a drug out of. So when you do the chemistry of foxglove plants, you find out that it's really this digoxin and digitoxin, which is the active ingredient, the chemical ingredient that lowers the blood pressure. And so that becomes synthesized in a laboratory and becomes digitalis or digoxin, or depending on which pharmaceutical company puts a brand name on it. And this becomes a prescription medication for blood pressure. The problem is that when you take the medication for blood pressure, you end up with all these horrible side effects that start to happen to you over time. But when you take the tea of the foxglove plant, you don't get those side effects. So it turns out that all of the, quote, superfluous material that was thrown away by the pharmaceutical company to extract the quote, active ingredient, turns out that that's nature's perfect little bundled plan to prevent side effects. All of it is necessary in a higher order of chemical interactions that fit with your body so it doesn't cause negative effects. Which brings me back to, the grand theme that I come across again and again and again. I'm going to write it down here. Which is the grand principle of Gedifadib. God did it first and did it better. Nature already has done it. Nature has spent millennia, eons, in working out all the blind alleys and all the mistakes and all the problems that arise, and fixed all of that. It's a closed, networked, ecological system that has worked out all the details. It's the kind of thing that I saw when I was going to chiropractic school and learning anatomy and physiology. Talk about an enlightening experience. If you're interested in structural engineering. Study the skeletal system. It blows your mind. Everything has been worked out in the nth degree of perfection of detail. If you're interested in biochemistry, here's the most amazing biochemical laboratory in the world. Everything's worked out perfectly. It just kind of goes on and on like that. If you're interested in computers, here's a quantum computer that works in 10 dimensions. So this idea that nature is what we should be looking to as the textbook of universal law to order how we approach things and do things, because it's already been worked out there. You're interested in generating energy for a civilization. How does nature do it? Free sunlight, wave motion, wind power, renewable, ecological, and on like that. So here's this idea that Hahnemann came up with, where you're going to take this foxglove plant and you're going to create a tincture out of it. And I'm not going to get into how you create tinctures, but it's infused in an alcohol solution for a week, and it distills out and concentrates the foxglove essence. And then you take 1 drop of that and you mix it with 99 drops of distilled water in a container, and you shake that. It's called succussion. And succussion is the key in homeopathy to change this from a dilution of 1 to 100, which is pretty diluted, to something that's potentized. And then you take, and that's called a 1C solution, C as in the Roman numeral for 100. A 1X solution is 1 drop to 10, X being the Roman numeral for 10. So these different potencies treat different levels of symptoms of different conditions. But let's go back to the foxglove, where we're going to take the concentrated tincture of the foxglove plant, and we're going to take 1 drop of this and mix it with 99 drops of distilled water and succuss that, shake it vigorously. And that creates a 1C solution. 1 drop of this mixed with 99 drops and succussed is a 2C solution. 1 drop of this succussed is, and on and on. 10C solution doesn't have a single molecule of the original substance, but it's 10 times stronger. So this flies in the face of ordinary science, and that's where modern medicine claims that this is quackery. And in the pharmaceutical purges of the 20s, instigated through, backroom deals, payola, and dirty tricks on the part of the Rockefellers, who were trying to back the most money-making business in the United States, because everybody gets sick. Therefore, you've got a captive audience of consumers for your product, and so what product do you want to sell them? This case, we want a renewable product that you have to continually buy over and over and over again every month, and that would be pills. So let's manufacture pills and sell pills to every person in the world. There's a good business model. And if those pills don't treat the condition itself, but treat the symptoms of that condition to silence those symptoms, we don't care if the condition itself gets worse, because that's new symptoms with the new pill that we can sell. From the standpoint of pharmaceutical industry, whose job it is to make money, that's the model. From the standpoint of doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals who are out there trying to get people well, that's a different order there. We have people who sign up for something that they realize later on isn't what they signed up for. You're a glorified drug pusher. Not to say that modern medicine hasn't made unbelievable advances in imaging and diagnostic techniques and developed to a fine degree the art of saving a life in the both the emergency room medicine and in ICU for saving your life, prolonging life. But most of what's in between, where there is a functional condition in my body that is not pathological, treated with the tools of pathology, you create pathology. It's called iatrogenic illness, illness caused by your doctor. The holistic approach is about as diametrically opposite of that as possible, because the search is always to find out what's the cause of these symptoms. Why are the symptoms there? The two systems need to come together, because there's no reason for you to be suffering with the symptoms once we begin the search. The symptoms could be silenced while we dig deeper to find out why those are there in the first place. But if your whole treatment is only to silence the symptoms and there's no digging to find out why, then that is not a good model where people's health is what's paramount. So if we want to make a 30C solution, we have to do this quite a number of times, right? We're going to take the mother tincture, 1 drop to 99, succuss it, 1 drop to 99, succuss it, on and on and on. 1 drop to 99, 1 drop to 99, succuss, 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 over and over and over and over again until we have done that 30 times. Then we have a 30C solution, very deep acting solution. And to understand this a bit better, a good example is rustoxicodendron, or what's called rustox, RHUSTOX for short. So rustoxicodendron is the genus name of poison ivy. And so when you touch poison ivy, this oily substance gets on your skin. It irritates, creates blisters and a lot of itching. Every place you scratch spreads it. It can get on your clothing and spread that way. So if you take the poison ivy plant and you make a tincture out of that plant, and you take 1 drop, in this case it's going to be an X solution. It's going to be 1 drop to 10 drops of distilled water and succuss it. So that's going to be a 1X solution. 1 drop of that to 10 and succussed 2X, 3X, 4X. Usually the preparation is about 6X. So when you take a 6X solution, the rashes and the itching start to go away. Many people start taking a 6X solution of Rustox when the season, the spring and summer season are starting, to sort of inoculate yourself against touching poison ivy. Either nothing will happen or it will be way, way, way reduced, so it's hardly a problem. Which brings us to the idea that inoculating for the future was a homeopathic idea from the very beginning. And some of the biggest companies in the world, the number one biggest, most astute company in the world for homeopathy is the Heal Corporation, H-E-E-L, in Germany. They have preparations for all of the communicable diseases. They have what's called nosodes, which are made from cancer cells. So now the cancer cell is the mother tincture, and we're inoculating you against the cancer itself. And it's more specific and powerful if the cancer cells are taken from your own body and a custom homeopathic remedy is made from the cancer cells of you. Which brings us to another point, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes here. But this is basically the idea of how homeopathy is done. Even to this day, homeopathic companies still do the same preparatory idea, where the succussion is putting the bottles in a shaking device that shakes them back and forth. And it wasn't really understood until much later with the Einstein-Planck law in the 40s, around the time of the war years, around the time that I was born in 1947, 1945, the Einstein-Planck law really solidified the science behind how succussion changes a homeopathic remedy from a dilute solution to a potentized solution. And the idea is that when you take an atomic substance and you bombard it with an external energy source, it changes that substance at an atomic level. It reveals the primary atomic energy pattern that makes that substance what it is. So when we look at the Einstein-Planck law, where the formula for bombarding a substance with an external energy source releases a primary energy pattern of that source, became the idea of bombarding atoms with energy. And essentially, that's what happens with succussion. With succussion, when I've got a container filled with distilled water and I've dropped 1 drop of this tincture in there and I start shaking it, what's happening in that beaker is acceleration deceleration force, which is basically high school physics. Energy is contained in acceleration. So in order to accelerate something, we have to add a force to it, and now the force is contained in the trajectory motion. When the trajectory motion of the fluids inside this container hit the edge of the container when I'm shaking it, every time I shake it, the fluid hits the end of that container, and kinetic force stops and continues into the atomic structure of this distilled water with the tincture, and you're bombarding the atomic structure of the tincture substance with an external energy force of acceleration force. Acceleration, deceleration, acceleration, deceleration, over and over and over and over again. Vigorous shaking is activating the Einstein-Planck law. And what it's doing is revealing the primary energetic structure of, in this case, say, the foxglove essence, that part that does the work to lower your blood pressure. The water itself is a weird substance, and it has magical properties in the universe. Above and beyond any other compound that exists anywhere, water has amazing special properties. This bond of oxygen and 2 hydrogens has a variety of ways of locking its structure in a lattice. And it changes that lattice structure depending on if it's a gas or a fluid or a solid ice. Well, water is the only substance that floats in its solid form and doesn't sink. Water has a incredible surface tension. So if you do a belly flop off of a 30-foot cliff into the water, you get severely hurt because the surface tension locks the water, and it's just as hard as cement. So when we get to this idea that water itself is magical, and we're using distilled water, pure water, this pure molecular form in our homeopathic solutions, we can create a new structural integrity of water when we expose water to certain energy forms. And this brings us to the whole point of the discussion about water can hold memory, that the structural lattice structure of water can change and get locked into the kind of forms that come into water. And some of the experiments done by Dr. Emoto showing crystallizing water, you can change it with your consciousness, with intention. Intention can change the structural form of crystallizing water. In this case, the shaking, the succussion in homeopathic preparation is doing something to the water itself, aside from the fact that we're activating the Einstein-Planck law and the substance that's infused in the water, the foxglove, so to speak. The atomic structure is now being revealed. So essentially what's happening is every time you succuss this and you bombard this atomic energy form of foxglove, you're essentially stripping a layer of materiality away at each succussion stage. So 1C strips one layer, 2C strips another layer, 3, 4, 5, 10C doesn't have a single molecule left of anything covering over the atomic energy form of the pattern of the foxglove that is doing the work to lower your blood pressure. That's why it's 10 times stronger, because it's 10 times more revealed. So this lattice structure of water also was something that I spent many years exploring myself. There's no accident that nature chose the water molecule to form 70% of your body and 80% of your brain. So the idea that there cosmic laws are involved in the choosing of the type of substance that you base this system on. And on Earth, it really shouldn't be called Earth, it should be called water. We're a water planet. 2/3 of this world that we live on is water, ocean, 5 or 6 miles deep in some places. And I said once before in one of the previous broadcasts, all life comes from the ocean and formed multicellular organisms. They evolved. They evolved right out of the ocean onto the land. And when we evolved from the ocean onto the land, what we did was create an organic spacesuit to hold the ocean water inside this spacesuit, 70% water. And that water is a saline solution, so it's very much like ocean water. It's salty. So we really have an organic spacesuit as a water being in a spacesuit so we can be on land. And I incorporated this into my practice, where with my sound healing technique that I call Biotuning, we hook you up to a medical monitoring system that I have a patent on, a heart rate variability system that's real time, that has special displays that show the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system locked into a fight or flight response all the time. Sympathetic on, burns up all your resources. My innovation is sweeping a series of sound frequencies through your body on a sound table and watching your nervous system respond to the sounds. And as the sound waves get closer and closer to the magic frequency for you, this stress response collapses to zero. Homeostasis, the prerequisite zone for healing. Energy has to be back in your reservoir at a zero stress place so your body can work on its maintenance list and heal the system. Because if you're running a fight or flight response all the time, your energy is spoken for to fight for your life. And if it's locked in for decades, then you're burning up all your resources and not rebuilding your tissues, and all kinds of symptoms and diseases begin to show. That's why I believe that stress is the ultimate cause of disease. And the ultimate fix for that is at the heart and soul of the system, the highest place you can go in the brain, where the autonomic nervous system resides in the center of the brain in the hypothalamus, which is the origin of the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous systems. And that's the system which is kind of the automated biotuning, the automated neurological program that tells all systems what to do. So if it's got a problem, everybody's got some problem. And if I can return it to normal with a precisely tuned sound frequency, and then use that every day with headphones, and every time I listen to it, the clutch pushes into this homeostasis place, we're exercising this ability in a gym for the brain to return it to normal. Meantime, because of the ability of water, particularly in its pure form, distilled water, in a container placed on top of this sound table, while you're getting a 30-minute treatment with all these sound waves coming up into your body, those sound waves are now restructuring the water with the frequency that balances your nervous system. And now when you drink that water during the week, it causes the same kind of thing to happen in your nervous system through the biochemical doorway. The water is affecting the water in your system. We're reprogramming the water throughout your system by infusing this distilled water that has had its molecular structure changed with the sound waves. So we're doing it from the outside in and the inside out. Eventually that became something else where, because at a certain point in my treatments, the sound that's coming through that does this work is an artificial kind of sound that I've made. Combination of the harmonics of a flute and a cello and a voice. But I'm eventually going to have you sing that note and record your voice in 3D microphones and slow your voice down by a number of octaves so only your unconscious mind can recognize it. And now we're going to use pattern recognition of the harmonics of your voice to wake up something deep in your unconscious mind. The place in you that knows how to grow your body out of 2 cells and what's wrong with you and what to do about it. We're trying to wake that part up. And at one point I had one of my infamous dreams that wakes me up in the middle of the night. And in this dream, I was making a homeopathic remedy out of you, taking scrapings from the inside of your cheek, which is living cells with DNA, and that became the mother tincture, your own DNA blueprint of the perfectly functioning body was the mother tincture. And that was being mixed with 99 drops of distilled water and succussed, and 1 drop to 99 and succussed, and 1 drop to 99 and succussed. But in the dream, the succussion was the container with your cells and the distilled water was in a mechanism with 2 transducers holding the container, pressed up against the container, and your voice in various octaves was driving through these transducers and causing turbulence in that water. And turbulence is one of the highest end explorations in geometry and mathematics. It's one of the most complex mathematical attributes to analyze is turbulence. Right up there with a sphere, the harmonic patterns of a sphere is also, those 2 things are probably the most complicated things in physics. But the analysis of turbulence and chaos theory and all of this stuff, the idea that all the water molecules are 100 or 1,000 times more activated, striking each other and striking the sides of the container, it's thousands of times more efficient way of succussing than just shaking back and forth in one plane. This is 3-dimensional planes of motion striking everything, much deeper form of succussion. using sound waves, and not just any sound waves, but the sound waves of your voice singing your frequency that causes balance in your autonomic nervous system. Now we have all the harmonics and the sound waves causing multiple levels of turbulence, and we're changing the lattice structure of the water and infusing this pattern of your voice singing a certain frequency into the structural elements of the water itself. So we're doing two things with the water. One is we're changing the molecular structure of the water, and two, we're using the Einstein-Planck law to strip layers of materiality away to uncover the primary quantum physics essence of the blueprint of you. The part of consciousness that organized energy into form created a blueprint and manufactured your body from that blueprint. Someplace inside of each of us knows how to grow my body out of 2 cells, differentiate the tissues, make it all run on automatic without me thinking about it under the hood. And that is my true biological identity, a place of deep and ancient wisdom that we tend to come in contact with when we take these sacred alkaloid substances like mescaline and peyote and LSD and mushrooms, strips this part away and reveals this ancient knowledge part of me where I know that I belong here in the universe. This is home. Here, the present moment, here, networked into reality, that the clouds and the mountains and the cosmos are brothers and sisters to me. The idea that the fractal quality of creating a homeopathic substance where these micro doses are like the same thing as sounds from the rings of Uranus sounding like Tibetan bowls, or sounds from the smallest moon of Jupiter sounding like crickets and birds. Speed and slow start to sound like each other. Large and small reflect each other. Patterns within patterns within patterns of fractals and holograms. All of it is one titanic, fractal, holographic, mirrored infinitely in itself, repeating forms over and over again. And that's similar to what I'm trying to get to in a description of what homeopathy is doing. The diluted forms is another fractal. And fractal elements that reflect each other in the same pattern over and over and over again obey the laws of coupled oscillators, because it's like octaves. Every time we get a pattern that repeats exactly the big pattern repeated small, that's an octave. And we know octave resonance is the primary resonance involved in the wine glass. So that's my take on spooky action at a distance. It's all just one big thing. It's an illusion that something is 100 million light years away and is dancing in sync outside of time with something here, because it's a fractal relationship of octaves based on octaves. And we can participate in that when we make a homeopathic remedy, particularly one out of ourselves. So at the core of the quantum field are repeating patterns, fractal geometry patterns, holographic patterns. Really, it's the fractal holography of a homeopathic idea that is universally large, where everything is connected to everything else in miniature and in dosage. Deeper and deeper and deeper into the quantum field, as deep as you could possibly go, where energy passes through different sort of lenses, galactic lenses and solar system lenses and planetary lenses and physical body lenses and quantum lenses, once again, it's like a fractal. We have, our galaxy is just a little tiny thing in a larger galactic arm, which is in itself just a small little particle in a massive intergalactic web. And that web, this massive, unimaginably gigantic cosmic web, where each one of these little, light spots here is, whole galaxies of star systems, which looks very similar to brain networks. When we look out here, we may actually be looking at a hypergalactic brain network of a larger being. The brain is a constellation of the same idea here. There might be infinitesimally small, unimaginably tiny beings that look up at the star systems in our own brain and see this pattern as well. That holds with what we see of how the universe is put together in fractal, holographic, homeopathic patterns. So, where all of it becomes one thing, you, me, the cosmos, infinitely small, infinitely large, and that's our theme today. The primary pattern of movements of things at a core level is what the soundtrack today is all about. So let's grab our headphones, because here we go. And close your eyes. Here we go. here's the address for this soundtrack. You just listen to. scientificsounds.com/cosmic homeopathy. So the things are wildly changing. The pandemic is still raging. Please continue to take care of yourselves. Watch your health, so that you can be here next Sunday. It's my honor and privilege to be here with you each Sunday. Thank you for joining.